Hi, welcome to the second video in a collection of 5 about post-structuralist discourse analysis. In the previous video, I talked about the sometimes puzzling international behavior of states. I introduced post-structuralist discourse analysis as an approach to understanding such behavior. But PDA is not for everyone. The method is useful only if your project shares the theoretical assumptions of post-structuralism. In this video, I will discuss 4 assumptions and illustrate them using my own project as an example. These assumptions are about 1. The nature of social reality, 2. Discourse, 3. Behavior, also called practices, and 4. Mutual constitution. Let me discuss these assumptions one by one. Assumption 1. The world that is relevant to our study of human behavior is socially constructed. This means that post-structuralist starting point is that there is no reality out there that we can objectively know. Our behavior is shaped by our collective, subjective understanding. And by that we mean that in every society people share ideas about the world, ideas about self and other, past and future, right and wrong, etc. These ideas shape the behavior of the people in that society, and vice versa. The social world is the product of the interrelationship between ideas and behavior. Assumption 2. We can study collective ideas by studying discourse. Discourse is a system of meaning production that makes sense of the world. This system is not fixed, it is fluid, it is not 100% consistent, and it changes. But discourse also has some level of consistency and stability, enough for us to be able to study it as the representation of meaning in language among a certain group at a certain time. Assumption 3. Discourse provides the context for behavior. In the context of a certain discourse, some behavior makes sense, while other behavior doesn't. If we want to understand the behavior of human collectives, such as states, we need to understand how they make sense of the world. Assumption 4. Discourse does not determine behavior. There is no causal relationship between discourse and behavior. Behavior is not the outcome of certain beliefs. Discourse and behavior shape one another. This happens through what we call a mutually constitutive relationship. Mutual constitution makes it virtually impossible to separate discourse from behavior. We only separate the two for research purposes, and we combine them again in the final analysis. In sum, post-structuralists agree that the world relevant to our study of human behavior is socially constructed through the mutual constitution of discourse and behavior. We study discourse to get an understanding of this social construction and to make sense of behavior. To illustrate this, let's go back to my research project on Iranian foreign policy. How can we understand the foreign policies of Iran? To many observers, it doesn't make sense. For example, rather than maximizing Iran's economic and security benefit through cooperation with the West, Iran has pursued a foreign policy which has alienated Iran from the West. And this was particularly the case during the presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad from 2005 to 2013. Traditionally, in international relations, or IR, we make sense of foreign policy by looking at interests, particularly threats and opportunities. States are seen as rational actors who seek to minimize threat and maximize opportunity. But sometimes states do not act in a way that minimizes threat and maximizes opportunity. Iranian foreign policy is but one example. To explain for such irrational behavior, researchers in IR have introduced norms, ideology, or identity as complementary factors that influence international behavior. And often such ideational factors are used to explain why states act irrationally. For example, some analysts would say that Ahmadinejad pursued an irrational foreign policy because he was constrained by ideology. This ideology was assumed to be Islamist and anti-Western. Post-structuralism offers a radically different approach. It does not treat ideas as a limiting factor. Instead, And in line with the theoretical assumptions I just talked about, post-structuralists think that international behavior should be studied in the context of discourse. Let's break this down. Foreign policy actors make sense of the world around them in the context of a dominant foreign policy discourse. Within the context of this foreign policy discourse, some foreign policy actions make sense, while other options are literally unthinkable. So, if we want to understand behavior, we need to study discourse. From this, it follows that to understand Iranian foreign policy behavior during Ahmadinejad, I needed to study how Ahmadinejad and other powerful foreign policy actors in Iran made sense of the world. The question that guided my discourse analysis was, how did Iranian foreign policy actors during Ahmadinejad understand the world? And particularly, how did they understand Iran in this context? It is important to emphasize that post-structuralism does not presuppose much about the discourse. As researchers, we try to keep an open mind when reading and analyzing texts. We let the discourse speak for itself, as it were. That means that in my study of Ahmadinejad's foreign policy, I wasn't looking for elements of Islamism or anti-Western ideology. Instead, I tried to read the text with as little presumption as possible. I read and reread the text to interpret the meaning of the text in its own context. This is what we call a grounded approach. In the next video, we start the method of discourse analysis by zooming in on the first step in PDA, collecting and selecting sources.